Welcome to the Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast. I'm Brandon Jaffe. Join us as we explore relationship and mental health issues by weeding out the trends in the mental health industry to uncover what truly works in improving our emotional well-being and relationships. At Inspired Resolutions Counseling, we specialize in providing interventions and resources for families with teens, focusing on topics such as teen mental health, parenting challenges, and family dynamics. In this episode, I'm going to talk about leading your family without losing yourself, and I'm going to try to touch on leadership of teens, of children, of your family as a whole, which a lot of times we think of the men, but this leadership discussion is for both parents. And parent leadership, it's not about control. It's about being grounded. And we throw that word around. And as a therapist, I've been working with parents for over 20 years. And I've seen over and over again parents trying to lead from fear, urgency, or their ego. And what happens is they end up creating more chaos. They end up damaging the relationship and losing the influence in their leadership. I was thinking about this topic because I hear so often, I live in a community with a lot of successful people, and so inevitably, every so often, talks or suggestions of reading leadership books and self-improvement books, and it's usually geared towards running a company or making sure that you are successful at various things that have to do with business and networking. And I was really just kind of thinking about it and had some conversations where I don't think that there's enough guidance in discussing with parents how to be a leader. And once you're a parent, you're supposed to be a leader. Even if it's not in your personality, a part of the relationship role is to lead. There's a difference between emotional leadership and emotional control. And as I'm saying that out loud, I think that there might be some misunderstanding in this, and because I often talk about, hey, don't let your emotions dictate your parenting, including leadership. Look, we are emotional beings, and I think that there's a big difference between allowing your emotions to turn into this fear-based control freak style and allowing your emotions in leadership to kind of set the tone. To set that tone and foundation for vulnerability, for honesty, for authenticity. Everybody loves that wording. Emotional control is something like this. You're always doing this. I told you, you better be ready. What is wrong with you? If you don't get ready, I'm gonna. And then leadership is, man, this morning feels stressful. Do you mind if we connect before bed to try to figure out how we can make tomorrow a little bit less stressful? I'm thinking about a dad that I worked with recently. This story, I have so many of these stories. I hear this in my therapy room so often, it's unbelievable. But working with a dad whose son shuts down every morning before school. And of course, like many parents, the dad was repeating, you got to get up and you're being disrespectful. And I remember a conversation where he was saying, look, he's just lazy and disrespectful. I dug in and was trying to understand. And what I found was there was another fear and frustration, and that's that the father was being late to his own work. So this wasn't a situation where it's, oh, my child's not performing well, therefore my identity's in my child and I feel resentful because my child's a reflection of me. This was a very practical, I'm late because my child is not listening and is not getting ready in the morning. And once we got there, it was really important that we had got there because it gave me an opportunity to help him with his leadership. And we obviously, as we always do, we talked about boundaries and protecting himself. What happened was the discussion began to shift. And actually, the father was able to discuss his fears and his experience of being embarrassed because of being late to his own work. And the way the discussion happened was very empathetic. It was an empathetic tone. It was not one of blasting the child and making sure the child learns his lesson. It was a really vulnerable, transparent discussion for the father. And it was kind of wild because that shifted what was going on in the morning. Because as we kind of uncovered things, the son's going, I don't understand the problem. I have good grades. I'm not late to school. You're the one making this hectic in the morning. And oddly enough, the son somehow hadn't caught on that dad was freaking out because of his own job and his own failures. And so there was the shift from being angry and controlling to being vulnerable and allowing emotions to guide, number one, setting boundaries, but number two, how he talked to his son. Not all cases go that way, though. There are some times where there's nothing that you can do. It's a bad season. You don't have control, whether it be because your child's defiant or maybe your child's anxious and you don't know what to do and they aren't performing and their stuckness is affecting you. And there's this discernment that you've got to know. And that's knowing when to let go and knowing when to step in. And as parents, we don't just step in because there's a big problem. We've got to ask ourselves, number one, is this mine to carry? Or am I trying to control something that's not mine to control? That question is really important. And next, you hear me say this all the time, what do I have control over? If I decide this might be something I need to step in and get involved with, well, it's why. Why am I doing that? And what do I have control over? There's these three kind of concepts. Number one, sometimes a parent's discernment leads them to realize, I need to let this go. I need to stop talking about it. I need to stop worrying about it. I need to get distracted with productive, healthy things. And a lot of times that doesn't fix the issue, but what it does is it creates this space. It gets rid of the struggle between the child and the parent in a way. And it almost creates a situation where the child can fail safely. And if a child can fail safely, that isn't you fix it for them. They can fail without experiencing shame from you. And we've got to remember that guilt and shame are different. Shame is not a healthy thing. Guilt is sometimes motivating and good and something you can use to empower yourself. But when you let it go, sometimes you're leaving the space so that you can lead. And it's kind of a mind twist. It's kind of hard to think about that. I'm going to let it go so that I can lead better. Yeah, sometimes you're letting it go because that is a part of healthy leadership. So sometimes you're letting it go, and sometimes you're kind of staying steady. You're staying present. You're not stepping out of it, but you're not in action mode. You're not in fix it, change it, give advice mode. And this is especially important when there's big emotions and big crisis going on. And so this is when in your leadership, you just kind of decide to stay present, but kind of take your foot off the gas. You're present, you're listening, they're not alone, but you're not engaging all that much. And then the third stance is, in terms of discernment and knowing when to let go or when to step in is, look, sometimes you've got to take the wheel. Sometimes you have got to take control, step in. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You don't worry about what they're thinking about you. You're not worrying about the enabling. And that's when their choices are unsafe or harmful. Some things are harmful in a way that isn't going to, it's not life-threatening. It's not going to completely uproot or damage heavily the people and themselves. And sometimes this is hard because we feel as parents like every moment is big and we can make a case for protecting and stepping in for everything. If you have a hard time making that discernment, you need help, you need to talk to somebody. But I remember one example, I was working with this mom, and again, this is another battle all the time, messy room. And when we started digging in and exploring things, the room wasn't actually the issue. It was mom's fear of disconnection. And there was a lot more to the case, but when she just was incessant about the messy room, yes, she was annoyed. Yes, she felt like she was teaching her daughter a life lesson that is really important. But at the end of the day, there was this whole other connection to feeling ignored, not feeling respected, and that's I'm losing my child. Once we kind of uncovered that, mom was able to stay calm, was able to take a step back, discuss maybe setting some boundaries, but we ended up talking more about mom's connection to her daughter And man, I can't remember. I really don't even think we ended up talking about the room anymore. And I know that the relationship started to improve and other issues began getting discussed. So remember, sometimes you're having big feelings and you're annoyed by things that aren't actually as important, but there's something bigger going on. And if you get stuck in the battle, and you get stuck in the micromanagement and you get stuck in the right and wrong of it, you might never be able to look inward and make a growth step that results in more influence. That brings me to another kind of leadership point, and that's your tone, your demeanor, how you say it, how you look. I talk about it all the time, is really important when it comes to leading your family. And it's one of these things where we're not good as humans. We're not good at being aware of how we actually come off to others. And if we come off poorly, sometimes we can justify that they're just taking it poorly and it's not us, it's them type thing. The whole communication and tone thing, it becomes something that's really obvious for a moment. But then when you get into the weeds of it with clients, it gets really hard for them to actually see and come up with alternatives and then practice it. Putting it in practice is really hard when you're stuck in the habits. I remember somebody I was talking to recently in session, there was a miscommunication about a dentist appointment. It wasn't on the calendar, and this was a couple. And so there was this huge blow up that had nothing to do with the miscommunication about the dentist appointment. As we're talking, like many things, just much bigger. And what was going on is one person wasn't actually feeling or thinking some of the things that the other person assumed based on what they were experiencing in tune and tone and volume and demeanor. And so as we peeled some of that back, there was kind of this shift in the relationship. And in the session, I remember they started laughing because once you're willing to listen to what's actually going on and you're open to how you're coming off, man, big things can change. There's a whole world sometimes that opens up. Now, sometimes I'm working with couples and the tone and the demeanor are what it is and the other person interpreting correctly and there's bigger problems. But a lot of times we just aren't very good at being self-aware in our leadership of our tone. And it's almost like if you're the leader, there's this assumption that you've got to have a sternness in your tone. And sometimes that's appropriate, but a lot of times that's not appropriate. And your tone, it just softening your voice and talking slower can change the way somebody experiences you 1,000-fold. You can say the same words really softly. And sometimes when you do it, you'll notice that the other person subconsciously matches your tone. I think a good leader has awareness and is able to use their tone as a communication tool. It's going to sound bad, but as a way to control the conversations, honestly. That brings me to another issue. We like to say, I don't know if this is true, but there's kind of that stereotype that men are constantly trying to problem solve and fix things. And one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of families that I work with, in trying to make points or figure out solutions to problems, there's this condescension that often gets used. And condescension is kind of a superior, I'm better than you attitude behind it. But I don't think we realize how powerful it is and how much it gets in the way of problem solving relationship issues. You know, an example comes to mind that happened recently. Great advice can go terribly wrong when it's delivered with condescension. You can speak the most amazing wisdom into somebody, and if it's done with superiority and condescension, sometimes you're going to get the opposite response, but we use it unknowingly so often. And one that's come to mind is it was a parent saying to their child in session, it's not that hard. And it's interesting because when I got my therapist hat on, that is condescending. That is speaking down to somebody. That's not motivating. And I can't think of a time that I've enjoyed somebody telling me that something I was struggling with wasn't that hard. And I called it out as condescension. We had a small back and forth as to what condescension is. And my example was, what if you said something more along the lines of, may I help you tonight so that tomorrow the morning is a little bit easier? And oddly enough, you're saying the same thing. Well, no, you're not saying the same thing. You're getting the same goal. And in this case, the parent just did not want to have the struggle in the morning with this certain task and waiting and some of the arguments that they had. Sometimes, so that we can stay away from condescension as a leader, what we need to do is get our heads into problem solving mode, empathetic problem solving mode. Another example comes to mind that I hear often. That's, again, I'm going to do kind of a gender stereotype, but dads sometimes will criticize the stay-at-home wife for not being organized enough, and will say things like, gosh, what did you do all day? Did you really not have time to do blank and blank? And I thought you were going to have this ready for me. Man, I'm exhausted. Now I got to do it all on my own. And I get it, and it's said out of frustration, but a reframe for that would be, hey, you know what? Is there a way that we can divide this, and this a little bit better? Because when I come home and it's not done, I'm kind of struggling. It's wearing on me. And a lot of times when you say it that way, guess what? The other person is more likely to be motivated to solve that issue and not even give you more tasks. But you're coming from a partnership. I'm going to lead with kindness, and a lot of leadership has got to come from an equal place. And it's not, I'm better than you or I'm telling you what to do. It's, hey, can we figure this out together type of attitude, which, especially for married parents, is going to work a lot better in the long run. It's humility. If I'm going to be a good leader, I'm inviting somebody to join me in the ideas I have for problem solving. I'm not demanding or instructing all the time. That brings me to another concept that I think is really important for leadership. So we get married because we have the same values and morals, supposedly, usually, hopefully. And what I'm finding in a lot of parents who have struggling children and are struggling with each other is that the values aren't actually completely aligned. And you can have 95% of your values in alignment and just have a couple of things that are different. And it feels like you don't even know this person and you don't know if you can stay in a marriage with them. I think that people forget there is a difference between morals and values. Now, some values are really obvious because they're rooted and based in morals. But there are some values that, even if they're somewhat aligned, they're not quite aligned all the way. And I see this happen all the time with cleanliness. I can have one person saying, they just don't care. They don't care to teach our kids the value of staying organized. And there are other ones going, well, they don't care about teaching our kids that it's more important to connect and be together than it is to be cleaning all the time. And it becomes this battle of nuance, I think, usually. An example is getting the kids out the door. I hear this one all the time. You're trying to get the kids out the door, you're late or maybe gonna be late, and the child bumps their toe or starts arguing and they're crying, and you've got one parent who stops to soothe and drops everything to take care of the child, and the other parent's going, what are you doing? We're already late. They're crying because they're not listening, and all you care to do is enable their crying instead of getting out the door. And then the other parent's going, are you kidding me? You don't even care enough. You care more about getting to the sports field or getting to the Disneyland or wherever it is that you're going than you do to care for your child. And then they're going, I do care for my child. And I just know when they're playing it up, and I know when to let them have consequences, right? And so the values can be in alignment. Hey, we got to love our child. We got to make sure that they're okay. And it's important to get to things on time. But you see, in the moment, somehow there's an unalignment. It's not aligned completely in that moment, and it turns into major damage to the relationship and resentment and hateful speaking and condescension and everything else that isn't leadership. And there's another way to handle that as a leader. Hey, we were late today. A leader in that moment because there's chaos, because there's crying, recognizes this is not the moment to make this important. Now, if you're getting somewhere and you got to be on time, if you're not, you're going to die, or you're going to lose your house or lose your job. So that's different. But if it's something like you're going to be late to the warm-up practice for the baseball game this one time, let's take a step back, ask ourselves how important this is, and then have a discussion later. Hey, I noticed that things kind of fall apart as we're leaving. Can we prepare to leave a little bit quicker? Or maybe we can get organized a little bit quicker, or whatever it might be. But be discerning as to when to address that and take that leadership role of, I'm not going to make this important in this moment, but I'm going to make it important that we address this issue as a whole in a cool, calm, collected, loving way. It's often that we have these differences. You've got one person who wants military precision and the other person who says they're clean, but they want it all loosey-goosey. Or it's almost like a level of the values. We got the same values, but where am I on the spectrum and where are you? Sometimes you got to just honor, recognize, be aware of the level of priority for the other person and know your own too, and kind of rate it. And then again, I like that word discernment, discern as to how and when you're going to address the issue. I think that brings me to the last concept, and that's you got to create systems and protocols and routines over stress. If things are chaotic consistently for one event in our household, it's my job to slowly create systems, discuss, try to implement, discuss again, try to implement, rather than participating in the chaos and the anger. It's my job as a leader to get creative, to recognize when, hey, things have fallen apart, but I can have a good mood. And by the way, even when things are falling apart, you can be in a good mood. That's a sign of a really good leader. It's about being grounded, but more than that, I can have a happy spirit as everything's falling apart around me. In fact, I would argue that's when it is most important to bring calmness, happiness, maybe lightheartedness to the situations. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to problem solve. That doesn't mean that you're not going to address the issues as the leader that need to be addressed. Lead with humility. Get rid of your ego. Discern when to step in, when to let go, when you need to problem solve. And be very aware of what systems are in place, what habits, what schedules, what your tone is. It's your job, like I said earlier, to create an emotionally safe environment and household for success, for failure, for chaos. And again, a good leader is bringing a positive spirit in all of this, even through the frustrating moments. I hope that helped, and I look forward to the next episode.
The Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast is an Inspired Resolutions production, hosted by Brandon Jaffe, edited and mixed by Natalie Atkinson, music by Natalie and Sean Atkinson. Inspired Resolutions Counseling is based in Yorba Linda, California. Whether you're interested in joining our group, seeking therapy services, or exploring more of our resources, you can find us on our website, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Inspired Resolutions Counseling.